Old Adobe Homes and Ranchos of the San Fernando Valley by David Smith. The San Fernando Mission was the 17th mission of the 21 established in Alta California by Spain. On September 8, 1797, a ceremony celebrating the founding was held, with priests, soldiers, and Native Americans in attendance. It's the oldest building in the San Fernando Valley. Local Native Americans built it under the Franciscan friars' direction. The mission was very prosperous in its time and served several purposes. They grew crops, raised horses and cattle, fed the Indians, priests, soldiers, and visitors. Quite a few people also lived there throughout the years. Inside the buildings are examples of how life was in the 19th century and before. Artifacts from the Native Americans including tools and baskets, a scene from a blacksmith shop, a church, paintings, gardens, and various other old items will give you a feeling of early California. The Catalina Verdugo Adobe. Located in Glendale, the Verdugo Adobe is on the outskirts of the San Fernando Valley, but close enough. Corporal Jose Maria Verdugo had come to California with Gaspar de Portola in 1769. For his service, he was given a provisional land grant of 36,403 acres in 1774. As a California rancher, he had the mark of his cattle's brand on plenty of livestock. During the California-Mexican War, General Andreas Pico spent time here under a large old oak tree. It was known as the Oak of Peace when the Mexican, Californio, and American armies came together to end the war. The adobe is on a 1.3-acre park for everyone to visit. The Andreas Pico Adobe was built first around 1834 as a one-room building. No one knows why it was built. Since the Indians of the San Fernando Mission did the work, it could have been for the mission as storage or someone's home. General Andreas Pico was granted a 9-year lease from his brother Pio Pico, the last Mexican governor of California. Andreas never lived in the adobe but lived at the mission instead, in the long building. Between 1846 and 1860, the dining room and library were added. In 1874, Caterina and Romulo Pico, the adopted children of Andres, were married and moved into the adobe. They added a kitchen and 2 wings to the second floor. They lived in it until the late 1800s. In 1930, Dr. Mark Harrington, who was the curator of the Southwest Museum and a famous archaeologist, bought the adobe, made many repairs, and he and his wife lived in it until 1945. When I began researching and expanding my interest in California history in the early 1980s, I joined the San Fernando Valley Historical Society. It was located at the adobe. At that time, they held meetings there. I also spent a lot of time in its library reading their books and learning more about early California. When Gaspar de Portola and his sacred expedition arrived at the village of Sukanga on August 6, 1769, they were greeted by around 200 Native Americans. The Spaniards were accepted as friends and offered food. This was the location of Rancho Lo. In 1849, Vicente de la Osa built the adobe in the California style. He did well for a few years with cattle. When the cattle business failed, he started a small vineyard, raised sheep, and rented rooms to travelers. Vicente died in 1861. His wife kept the ranch until 1867 and sold it to her daughter and husband. It was sold and resold until 1916 when 1,170 acres from the rancho were sold and became the city of Encino. In 1949, the local community saved the buildings from the developers. The state of California bought it, and it became the Los Enseños State Historic Park. It is also a museum, and they hold various events in which reenactments are done of the lives of the people of the time period. Docents also dress in period clothes and are very knowledgeable of the history of the rancho. The Leonos Adobe is in Calabasas. No one knows who actually built the adobe, but it's dated back to 1844. Miguel Leonos was a Basque and came from France with many other French immigrants in 1854. He worked on a ranch as a sheep herder. It wasn't long before he accumulated a lot of real estate and became known as the King of Calabasas. His common-law wife was a Native American. Her name was Espiritu. She had a son from her first marriage, then her and Miguel had a daughter together, but she died at 20 years old. Miguel died at 65. Espiritu contested the will, which left her very little compared to the fortune Miguel had. She finally got possession of the ranch, but died shortly afterwards in 1906. The Adobe property is a replica of the Rancho days of Southern California. They have a museum inside of the Adobe, while outside there's a barn, farm equipment, windmill and water pump, a bathhouse, and various ranch animals to visit. There is also a replica of a Chumash Native American village. The Lopez Adobe is located in San Fernando. It was built by Valentin Lopez in 1882 and is well known for its Victorian and Mission style of architecture. He built it for his sister Catalina and her husband Geronimo. They ran Lopez Station a few miles north of the Adobe, which was a stage station for the Butterfield stage lines. It was also the first post office and English-speaking school in the San Fernando Valley, as well as a general store. The coming of the railroad ended the need for the stage and freighting business. Geronimo and Catalina Lopez spent their older years living at the Adobe. Catalina died on April 21, 1918, Geronimo 3 years later in 1921. She was 87, he was 91. They had celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary in 1911. The Adobe stayed in the family until 1961. It's also a museum and has old items from early California. The Miranda Adobe is located in Chatsworth, in the Oakwood Memorial Park. It's currently a flower shop. Francisco Miranda came to California in 1868 from Mexico. On August 23, 1876, he married Maria Benito Salas at Mission San Juan Bautista. They came to the San Fernando Valley around 1880 and homesteaded 133 acres. They had 14 children together. This Adobe isn't a museum. The property doesn't reflect the California Rancho days. I discovered this Adobe via the Iverson Ranch blog. I'm also interested in Hollywood movies and where they were filmed. Since D.W. Griffith, the silent film director, had property here in my town of Sylmar, I follow him and Lillian Gish. There were a lot of movies filmed in Chatsworth until the 118 freeway was built. It was under construction from 1968 to 1979. Roy Rogers had a ranch close by in the 1950s named the Double R Bar Ranch. It was used in several of his movies and his TV series. Thank you for watching, and happy trails, everyone.